Yeah, we are in the place to be. Yeah, 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 yeah,
We're going to pause for a moment of silence, and we're going to have a guest from Coyote Hills, Mr. Blake Ernester, to start the pledge for us. So if I have everybody stand up and pause.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving right along to item 3.1, address agenda and consider adoption or make any recommendation changes. Governing Board, the order that is presented, would you like to move anything around? It's in order.
Oh, it is?
Mhm.
Oh, I'm sorry, the notes.
Okay, that's right.
Okay.
At this time, we're going to proceed as presented. We're going to move on to 4.1, staff recognitions. Miss Airy is not here today, so we'll go ahead and start with our superintendent, Miss Linda Pellis-Thompson.
No, I have actually nothing, Mrs. Sayas Martinez. We have, a lot of our people are out. This is their vacation time. Note that my group is still here, so we're still operating. And no, we'll move on and get our recognitions next time.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to 4.2, board recognitions. Miss Underhill. Miss Pangarelli? Mr. Sandoval?
Yeah, just very briefly, just wanted to recognize the city once again. I mean, as we go through our summers and, the schools, sites, are closed, but I really appreciate the city's kind of partnership that we have and their kind of additional layer of support, for whether it's be food boxes or certainly health and wellness. So I just wanted to recognize them for that.
Thank you. Ms. Stone? And I do not have any as well. Moving on to 5.1, public comments not associated with the agenda. We do not have any for non-agenda items, but we do have one for the consent, which we'll pull in just a moment. Moving on to 6, consent agenda item, governing board. Are there any items that you would like to pull?
Yes,
Sandoval.
I would like to pull 6.12, which is the consideration to approve the Ruth Culver Living Trust.
Thank you. And I would like to pull 611, information on JAG. Ms. Underhill, any additional items?
No.
Ms. Pangarelli? No. Ms. Stone? Thank you. I do need a motion to approve the consent agenda item excluding 611 and 612.
Motion to approve this consent agenda minus 611 and 6.12.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Sandoval and a second by Ms. Underhill to approve the consent agenda item excluding the 2 items. Yes. We're going to proceed with the voice vote. Ms. Pangarelli is having some technical difficulties that we're working through. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that. Moving on to items removed from the consent agenda item, we're going to go ahead and start off with 611, consideration to approve an agreement between the district and Jobs for Arizona Graduates Incorp., also known as JAG. I requested to pull this item. As I've been on the board, I've learned and heard about the JAG program that serves our students, and I wanted to hear a little bit more. I know that the document speaks to themselves, and I got on the website, but specifically how it pertains to supporting all our students. I know we have a couple guests. Do you, Mrs. Pellis-Thompson, do you want to help us out with that one?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to invite Principal Bauer up if he could.
And then, is the mic on?
On yet?
There
Thank
you
you.
go.
Principal Bauer, if you could, that's why you couldn't hear me. Like, did you say that? If you could, to tell us about your program. You talked a little bit about it this afternoon as we were getting some of our questions answered. So could you share some of your information with the board?
Yes, glad to be here tonight. My name is Paul Bauer. I'm a principal at Peoria High School. JAG is a program that is in place at Peoria. It runs 9 through 12 grades there, and at Sunrise Mountain in their 12th grade. I believe it's their second semester. It is primarily a college and career program with an emphasis on dropout reduction. It's affiliated with the national program called Jobs for America's Graduates, and here in Arizona, it's Jobs for America's Graduates. So these are targeted students. There is a 9th grade cohort, a 10th grade cohort, 11th and 12th grade cohorts, and those folks work on those soft skills that we usually associate with resume writing, college and career readiness, those type of programs, and then also some academic readiness, perhaps usually some credit recovery that also would take place during that class as well. We've been recognized nationally as an ideal program. I think we received the award 2 or 3 years ago. One of the great components of it, too, is that students compete both regionally and nationally for different competitions similar to DECA and some of the other CTE programs. They have a state convention once a year. They have a variety of different competitions ranging from some of those lower element outward bound type activities, if you're familiar with that, to public speaking, to problem solving, to resume writing, to interview skills. So we've had great success with our kids. Some of them actually have been recognized nationally. The other interesting thing that happens with that's a component of it, is we track those kids for the year after they graduate. So we get some excellent data from them, what they're doing moving forward as productive citizens. Some of them are right into the workforce. Some of them are going to junior college. Some of them are going on to four-year institutions right out of high school, which without that support that JAG provides would never be an option for them.
Thank you for sharing that. I know we've had the opportunity to learn about your senior class of 2019, high success rate with 86% roughly going on to secondary education. Are those some of the students that you're referring to?
Yes, they are.
And where does the funding come from for the JAG?
So we partner, we receive, I believe we've received approximately 40 grand over the last couple of years for that as a district, and then we fund the rest of that teacher's salary through Title I expenditures.
Excellent. You've shared a lot of great things. If the board could support you going forward, what is something that comes in mind as we continue to look at student success and stewardship of resources?
I would say just continue to work with JAG from the state level. It is an outstanding program. I've been in education a long time, and it is one of those success-oriented programs that is research-based, that has yielded terrific fruit, not only this year, but over time in a variety of programs. And personally, come on out. I know many of you have been on, I think, Mr. Sandoval, you've been there for one of the initiation programs, I think, several years ago. So come on out. We do one in the fall and one in the spring. Our kids are fantastic. It's really cool to see them dressed up and ready to go. Here's an interesting story, I think, that kind of gives you an idea of what it was like. 2 years ago, the state conference was held at the Crescent Hotel at I-17 in Dunlap. Very fancy ballroom. The kids sit down to a 5-course meal, and I don't know about you, but I never know which fork to use or whatever. And you can imagine some of my high school kids were looking at me. I'm like, don't look at me. I don't know what fork to use. But those type of things are really important for kids as they move forward into the workforce, to know how to conduct themselves in a fancy business-like setting, to be able to seriously know which eating utensil to use, to which how you behave in that type of setting, from a firm handshake, looking someone in the eye, to be able to have an elevator speech ready to go to talk with someone at the table, because they split the kids up and they eat with a variety of different business leaders, political leaders, and things like that. So it was a great thing to see our kids in action in regards to that.
Well, thank you for spending this evening with us. Let me check, Ms. Underhill, do you have any questions or?
I had one question, and I think a lot of JAG too, just from what I've heard about it from previous days working at United Way and visiting other school districts that had it, but also, here, obviously, I've heard about it for a long time at Sunrise, where my kids go. I've always wondered though, so the kids at Peoria, how are they, that's like per grade level, you have
Correct.
a kind of a cohort that goes through, and then you just kind of track them the whole way through?
Mm-hmm.
How are those students like identified? Is that through teacher
The
identification?
counselors and teachers and administrators will look at that. We're looking for kids who academically show promise, that might just need that extra support system underneath them. We're looking for kids that are, whose environmental situations are pretty dire, and so they need those type of resources in addition to the academic support. And then we're looking for kids who have outstanding leadership skills, but to give them an opportunity to exhibit those skills, particularly for those subgroups that perhaps are underrepresented in student council or DECA or FBLA or things like that.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then the Sunrise model, so is that, it sounds like that's a little different, like that's focused on seniors. Is that kind of a different, like, focus or
Understanding of the
curriculum?
Sunrise program is that they're looking at their seniors who are severely at risk of
Okay.
not graduating, and so they're able to target them in the late fall and to put those safety nets around them.
Great.
I could be totally off base on that.
No, that's great. All right, thank you very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Ms. Pingarelli?
No questions, thank you for coming.
Sure.
Mr. Sandoval?
Yes, Mr. Bauer, there's no doubt you're doing a lot of great things at Peoria High. I mean,
Thanks.
doubling the amount of scholarships, year over year, and this sounds like a fantastic program. One that I think, all of our sites, could certainly look at and benefit from. I mean, would that be a recommendation from you as we take a look at a Liberty or a Kellis or a Cactus, et cetera? I mean, it sounds like it has the ability to adapt to the specific needs of a site.
Yeah, absolutely. I would only say selfishly that would probably mean less money for Peoria High School. So, but no, I think research is pretty clear. It's been able to be customized to the site, and it is also not in our district, but in other districts around particularly the West Valley. It's in some junior highs as well.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
President
Stone.
Seahar Martinez,
Yeah.
if I
Ms.
could.
Myers.
Thank you, members of the board. Mr. Bauer, if I could, the payments actually over the last 2 years have been $30,000 a year. And then this year's payment will be $39,000. So the funding's actually a little bit higher.
Excellent. Thank you. Ms. Stone?
No, I appreciate you coming here to give some detail as to what's going on, and thanks.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Thank you again this evening for joining us. We look forward to hearing more, especially about those invites and how we
Okay.
can continue to support you.
Great. We will do that.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So at this time, this is a voting item for 611, consideration to approve an agreement between the district and Jobs for Arizona Graduates Incorp., JAG. I move to approve the recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Sandoval. And we're all logged in. Thank you very much. It passes unanimously. Moving on to the next pooled consent agenda item, now 7.2, consideration to approve the Ruth Culliver Living Trust's non-judicial settlement agreement transferring the beneficiary from the Peoria Unified School District to the Peoria Education Foundation. Mr. Sandoval.
Yeah, so, as I took a look at this line item, I just wanted to learn more about the trust, sitting on the foundation as the board liaison and understanding, and really to understand, why it makes sense to move it from the district to the foundation as far as managing the trust. So from understanding, I think you've got a green slip there, so we'd
do.
love to learn more.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Sandoval. And we do have a public comment. Ms. Julia Smog, former governing board member, appreciate your service to our district in addressing this item.
Thank you. President, board members, and Superintendent Thompson, I am here in my capacity as a member of the Board of Directors of the Education Foundation. And what this item does is it transfers what was money supposed to be given to the district to the Education Foundation. Obviously, the Education Foundation is pleased to accept the responsibility and the pleasure of adding yet another scholarship to those that are already available to our students. But in this particular case, this is money from Nelson and Ruth Culver. My understanding is that one or both of them were teachers in the district. He died, I think, in 2003. She passed away in 2016, and the trust kicked in, and they actually gave money to 6 different education entities, including Northwestern University. There's a high school in Illinois, probably family-related. And they also included the Peoria School District. And this scholarship is for it has very specific requirements. And the reason that the Ed Foundation has it, needs to have it rather than you, is that for someone who's graduating, and it is a scholarship that provides for a student to receive money the first year, and if still in school, the second year and the third year and the fourth year, and you all are not allowed to do that. So we are in a great position to do that because we handle scholarship applications on a regular basis. Just so you know, it's a very, very specific, it's very specific in its requirement, and it is for a graduating senior female who has demonstrated an intense motivation to perform academically above and beyond the expectancy of the SAT and the ACT. Other qualities to be considered are character, citizenship, poise, respect for contemporaries at all levels of contacts and relationships. So that's what we're going to be able to do. You all will sign off on this. It required, and the reason I'm in here is because they wanted a lawyer to talk to another lawyer. And the lawyer for the trust worked with the bank, and they had to get the approval of the other 5 people, other 5 beneficiaries in order to make this change from the school district to the Education Foundation. So that's why it's taken a little bit of time to make this happen. But with your approval of this tonight, all the documents will be signed, and that money will be transferred to the Peoria Education Foundation, and we will be able to award that scholarship for the first time next spring.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Underhill, any comments or questions?
I think that's wonderful that, they thought enough of PUSD, first of all, but that it will continue to, live on in PEF. So thank you.
Ms. Pingerelli?
No comments?
Ms. Stone?
No.
As well, just thank you for the opportunity, privilege, and it's an honor.
And I just want you all to know that if you have a chance, if you look at the funding that the amount of money that the Education Foundation has now compared to what it had 5 years ago, we're talking about being at a completely different level and at a point where people are starting to think of us in terms of bequests on death or gifts. And so anybody who wants to donate to the Education Foundation, we're more than willing to take their money. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we do need a motion.
So I move that we approve the transferring of the Ruth Culver Living Trust non-judicial settlement from the district to the Peoria Education Foundation.
We have a motion by Mr. Sandoval and a second by Ms. Stone. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, and we are moving on to 8.1, discussion and consideration of administrative appointment. Dr. Carter Davidson.
All right. Good evening, President Seha Martinez, members of the board, Ms. Powell Thompson. Tonight, I stand before you to recognize an employee that we'd like our governing board certainly to hopefully allow come to serve as district athletic director. So, Ms. Seha Martinez, I believe typically we would ask for a motion of sorts, and then depending on how that goes, I'll go from there.
Much. I move to approve the recommendation for the athletic director position.
I'll second. Oh, go ahead, Corey.
A motion by myself and a second by Ms. Underhill. Should we do a voice vote? My little hand disappeared. Did your hand disappear? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, governing board members. That just adds a little stress to the evening there, but that's great. Well, on behalf of the, ultimately our total committee and our staff, I'd like to recommend that Mr. Mark Ernster be appointed to the position of District Athletic Director for the 1920 school year. Mark currently serves as the Assistant Principal Athletic Director at Sunrise Mountain High School. Mr. Ernster once served at Bradshaw Mountain High School as Athletic Director and in the Peoria Unified School District as a math teacher for 11 years from 2002 through 2013. In addition, Mark has worked with the Arizona Diamondbacks, Coast to Coast Athletics, and the Milwaukee Brewers. Mr. Ernster earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Exercise Science and Physical Education from ASU and a Master's degree in Ed Leadership from Northern Arizona University. So without further ado, we'll recognize Mr. Ernster. As Mark comes up, I'd like to introduce his wife, Carol, their son, Blake, and his soon-to-be supervisor, Ms. Lopez Lira. So thank you for being here to support Mark in his new role. Congratulations.
Good evening, everybody. President Seha Martinez, members of the board, Superintendent Ms. Linda Powell Thompson. I don't want to forget my son that'll be here in a couple weeks. My wife is 9 months pregnant, so he's here in support as well, as my family. It's an honor to be here. 34 years ago, I started, I'm going to call it my life in Peoria as a second grader at Copperwood Elementary under Dr. Argundram. And fast forward 34 years, and it's because of this wonderful district that has shaped, outside of my parents, who I am today. And what I've done in my life is due to the wonderful people that are in this district. And I couldn't be more thankful for the opportunity to be here today, to each and every one of you for your support, to everybody that I get to work with on a daily basis that's here in support of me. I'm truly blessed. So many people gave me so many great things from this district, and I truly believe that. And I serve today to give our children the same thing that all these wonderful people gave me. And I'm here to assure you that I will give everything I have to continue making this a wonderful place. I'm very proud to be Peoria. I came back from the mountains to send my son to Peoria as a first grader at Cowdy Hills, and I'm just extremely thankful for the opportunity. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and start. Ms. Doan.
Well, congratulations, and just kind of getting things straight. You're going to work here in this building then?
Yes, ma'am.
And so it's your job now to you're the boss of all the sports, right? That's what you are.
Yeah, so I would oversee 39 schools' athletic programs. I've been at the high school the last 6 years, but I've also coached and taught the elementary, so I'll run the entire program.
I thought I would just get that completely clarified. That's a pretty comprehensive job, and it looks like you've built up to it so that you have a good understanding of what goes on. So welcome aboard. Glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Sandoval.
Mr. Ernst, congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Carol, Blake, and should you have a
Yeah, Jackson.
Jackson? Okay. Congratulations to all of you. It is a family affair. So a couple things. My son went to Sunrise. Graduated just last year. But what are some of the things from a leadership regard that you feel that you'll bring to this role? And as you take a look at, not just athletics, but some of the other, I guess, line items within your scope of work that you'll be over, how will you just impact these programs with an understanding that, athletics, one of our many programs, influences our students, social regard, certainly confidence, and certainly impacts their success in the classroom. Can you talk about that a little bit, just what you'll bring from a leadership regard?
Yeah, so I could probably spend about a half an hour on that, but I'm going to shorten it down. I'll give you kind of the condensed version from the interview and the things that I believe in. Athletics is such an important part of life. It can teach you so many life lessons and life skills. It's not about winning championships, and I'll preach that championships are a result of doing things the right way. For me and my coaches, and when I was a coach, and the way I'm going to lead now, it's about teaching our kids some of those core values that we're going to establish as athletic directors, that when we talk in front of our parents and our kids, it's those life lessons and those things that we want our kids to leave here with that are going to help them be successful in life. As far as the infrastructure of our district, I think I'm going to bring a systematic approach where I'm going to build the infrastructure within the department across the district. Kind of right now, a lot of people operate on a different island, doing different things. My vision is that we're all on the same playing field, that we're all working together, rowing in the same direction, if you will, so that eventually, and I know with the troubles, financially with the state and all the things that are there in that area, that we can become a self-sufficient program that invests in all of our programs, not just the high schools, but at the elementary as well, that utilizing all of our different revenue sources, we can create a system that thrives, that teaches our kids about life and prepares them for life. And you're going to see, the championships and the life stories and the players that go on to be in the World Cup and, the things that we're seeing right now, that those kids can come back and speak to our kids on the great things the same way that I feel.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think one of the things that we've always challenged the district with is, creating affinity type relationships, right? Whether it be to garner resources from just time, but also money, right? So we're looking forward to your connection with the D-backs and Brewers to donating $2 million each to the athletics program, sir.
Position.
I played for him. I obviously didn't make millions, so.
Thank you. Ms. Pangarelli.
I just want to say congratulations and welcome to your new position.
Ms. Underhill.
I also want to say congratulations, although I have a senior and a freshman at Sunrise, so of course we're sorry to see you go. But I'm just excited about your energy and obviously kind of your innovation. I know that, athletics does so many things for our young kids, and I think that there's a real tie to kind of the career readiness skills that we always talk about, and some of those aspects that you talked about building leadership and collaboration and, persistence, all those things we want to build in our kids. So it's exciting to see someone that's a product of our system with a young family and lots of energy, coming back and taking that helm. So thank you for that. Thank you for your service. And I have to say, my oldest son is named Jackson. So good pick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and to your family. I know anybody who chooses education, especially athletics, it's you really have a passion and drive for that. My colleagues here shared the congratulations, and I just wanted to give you a heads up. We have 2 items on our future agenda, AIA and Pass No Play. So I look forward to seeing what you have to bring forward to the district so that we continue to support our students in every which way we possibly can.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, generally, you can go and enjoy dinner, or you can stay for the rest of the board meeting. Moving on to 8.2, presentation and discussion of the District for Special Education Program. Ms. Holly Harper.
Hello, good evening, President Sehar Martinez, governing board members, and Superintendent Pallas Thompson. My name is Holly Harper. I'm the Director of Special Education, and joining me this evening next to me are three of our extraordinary special education coordinators, Dr. Corey Montano, Joanne Morales, and Brenda Baer. We're honored to share some insight into special education this evening. Thank you. So special education falls within the strategic perspective of student success. Special education is also well aligned to safety and well-being, stewardship of resources, and community connection. Thank you. What is special education? Special education provides eligible students with specially designed instruction to meet their unique learning needs and access to general education. In the United States, special education is funded by federal and state governments through the public education system, thanks to the Individuals with Disabilities Act, as we call IDEA. And before we continue, because we do have a lot of data to share, we do want to say that our students come first and foremost. Students are provided with sound academic opportunities to meet their physical, emotional, social, and post-secondary potential. It is our commitment to provide demanding programs appropriate for all levels of ability. And those are some of our students. So special education in Peoria is large. We have 5,268 students. And this graph is an overview. My mic go off? No. This graph is an overview of the last 3 years. Since October 1st, 2015, the number of special education students has increased by 390 in just the 3 short years. Nationwide, special education numbers are on the rise and are expected to continue to have an upward swing. Special education students account for 14% of our total student population, which is consistent with national averages. So can you go back one? So where are our students educated? What this data shows is a breakdown of how much time students are spending with their non-disabled peers. The large blue section indicates the percentage of students participating in general education classrooms for 80% or more of their school day. The orange and gray sections represent less time in the general education classrooms and more time in special education, which is considered a more restrictive placement. The yellow section represents our preschool students in developmental preschool with all disabled peers. The light blue represents preschoolers educated in the community preschool setting where they have access to non-disabled peers. The green slice represents our students who are receiving services in an educational private placement due to specific needs greater than what can be met in our schools. Now let's focus back onto the large blue portion. If we were to focus on just elementary schools for this pie graph, the large blue section would be 71%. However, if we were to change this graph to look at just our high school, the blue section would be only 29%. We see this as an area of concern that while in elementary school, special education students are in general education classes more than twice as they are when they hit high school. This is greatly influenced by our block scheduling and lack of co-taught classes. To put this in perspective, the Arizona Department of Education monitoring expectation is for this blue section to be 75% or greater. We would like to see 80% of our students to be in general education classes for 80% or more of their day.
Do you mind, that was a lot of information, we just paused.
Yes.
Allow our governing board, if you wanted to take some time to address some of those questions or revisit, we'll go ahead and start. Ms. Underhill, did you want to?
I guess if you could just speak a little bit about how our block schedule impacts our percentage of kids that are in that blue section, just a little bit. That'd be
Sure,
great.
absolutely. And it is because of the way the block schedule is created, and I'm not saying pro or against the block scheduling, it's just how it works out. Because if you have one special ed class, that accounts for 25% of your day. It's because we have 4 classes, so if one of those is a special ed class, you're automatically 75% of your day. You can't hit the 80% mark. And so just one class, so if they have two classes, that's 50% of their day, which now they're at a B, and our results are skewed because of that, because of the block scheduling, which does have its pros and cons. And we also, as well, later on in the presentation, I do go into co-teaching a little bit more.
So if we're comparing to like schools that aren't on block schedule, I can see where that would be real difficult. If we compare to other districts that are on the block schedule, have they figured out a way to compensate for that better, or?
I am not sure which high schools have block scheduling still in the state. I'd have to do some more research on that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pangarelli?
Ms. Underhill hit my questions.
Okay,
so.
perfect. Mr. Sandoval?
Yeah, that was going to be the question, just what the solution would be, right?
Yes. Right. And we're hoping we do have some of our next steps for next year, especially with the co-teaching, if we can have less special ed full-time, what we call resource classes or LSC classes, and more students in our co-taught classes, then we solve a lot of we solve that concern. Okay.
Ms. Stone?
So the 1%, would that include children that are more severe?
Did you move on to the next slide?
Pardon?
Are you on the 1%?
I'm at the 1%.
Can you pass?
It says evaluation at or IEP only, perhaps?
Okay, yes, I think you went on to the,
That's where we stopped, right?
Yeah, the next slide.
there it is, okay.
All right, so what I want to
Yes.
know is, that's only a 1%. And so that would include anyone that is not able to go into the non-special ed classes at all?
Yes, so that 1%, and the reason why I outlined this is because even though it is only 1%, it is time-intensive involvement, and it's very and it requires specialized staff. So those students, that 1% are students who are in residential treatment centers, so their needs are significant. It represents our homebound students who are in the hospital. We do still have an obligation to provide services to them as well. We do serve students at the Phoenix School for Deaf and Blind, Foundation for Blind Children. And then the last three, students who are homeschooled, are not-for-profit private schools, and students who are on ESAs, we do still have an obligation to evaluate and do our child find obligation. So we do still do evaluations for those students.
Well, I'm talking about more of, okay, I visited, and have seen the classrooms with the children that they're basically doing more physical therapy than anything else, some of them.
Okay.
And then there are the classrooms that are I don't want to discuss personal issues, but I will say that my daughter could not handle a mixed class. She was put in a mixed class, and there was just nothing she could learn there. Okay, so would that be under the IEP only?
No. Was it in one of our schools?
Yes.
Okay. I think what you're referring to is probably on if you go back a slide, it would be probably in the gray area. Those are students who are in special education classes 60% or more of the day. So they could be in a special education classroom 60 to 100% of the day.
Okay, 60 to 100, okay.
Yes.
All right, that's what I was looking for, that group. And I would like, is there anything, I didn't see anything in here on comparison of how much of staff and resources are committed to those children that are in special education 100% of the day, and how that compares to children that are able to integrate into regular education, like 80% or whatever, somewhat.
You're talking about the staffing ratio for those students?
Well, that and everything. ratio is huge.
Okay. I can, if you want, I might want to continue in the presentation. I might, because I do talk about staffing, and we can talk a little bit more.
I
when we
did
get
see
there.
some in there about it,
Okay.
so.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine. Can you-
Anything else, Ms. Stone?
Not right this minute, thank you.
Pangarelli, you wanted to circle back?
Actually, I just had one question. And it's in regards to, you said that it's a 14% is increase for PUSD nationwide. You had given right now we have 5,268 students in these programs. And I know like 3 slides further down, you break it down. Do you know what the increase is? Is there a particular group that has increased, and are you going to talk about that later? Okay, sorry.
That's a great question,
Okay.
yes.
For me, I want to circle back to the block scheduling because there are a lot of articles that support inequities when our students are put in a block scheduling. I'm experiencing now that I have a son transitioning into high school. As a result, he's taking so that he can be and match the model that we have, where 80%. So I wanted to circle back on the model. The model that we choose in Peoria Unified to fit most of the 80%, is it ideology? Is it federal mandate? Is it per IEP? Where are we deciding we want to put most of the kids in general ed?
It's based on their IEP.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. The IEP team determines the amount of services for each student.
Okay. And so when we're having these conversations with parents, some of them have vast knowledge because they've been with DDD, developmental disability, they have advocates. How are the parents that don't have those advocates being educated on if they can choose one of these other models? Because they do have the right to say, I don't want my child in this full 80% or this full model, and I want to switch them off. So how are we educating parents when making these decisions?
I think Dr. Montano wants to answer this question.
Okay. President Ceja Martinez, and thanks for that question. Essentially, we have an obligation to provide what is called FAPE, a free appropriate public education. So while parents absolutely have rights and they know their students, they're experts on their children, we as an educational expert, as part of that team, have to discuss what we determine is appropriate in order for them to meet both progress in general education as well as their individual IEP goals. So when a team comes together, they discuss, first and foremost, how much can the student get within the general education setting, with accommodations in place, et cetera. And then you kind of keep adding more. So what cannot be done in the general education setting? If we're not in agreement between maybe a parent's perspective and what the educators are recommending, there's a couple different avenues. Oftentimes we try something, we try and see if there's any compromise that is appropriate for the student. It might be a misunderstanding. Sometimes we do want to educate parents. We have resources that we're able to assist with that. We also have, actually in the state, we have an agency that we're able to refer to that is free of cost and can help assist them. But essentially we want to make sure that we're making decisions based on that individual student's unique needs. We discuss it. There might be accommodations that could be in place that would alter it, but ultimately the team has to either come to consensus or at the table, whoever's being their district representative kind of has to say, this is what it would look like for us to develop a plan that would provide FAPE, like I described. The parent always has the right to do what is called a revocation of consent. So they could say, you know what, I hear you, I don't agree, we don't want any services. The one thing they can't do is kind of an a la carte. They can't say, I want this, but not that, because we are developing an IEP that we believe they need all of what the team is determining in order to be successful.
So in that conversation, especially as our students become advocates for themselves at the high school level, how do we incorporate their voice in that conversation?
We're going to talk about that a little bit later, if you don't mind the pause button on that.
Nope, that's great. That's my only questions my colleagues asked to address those numbers.
We can go one more. All right, this slide has a lot of good information in it. So where are our specialized programs? So our specialized programs are located throughout the district. We have 3 specialized programs for students needing a higher level of support embedded throughout their environment and the day. Our ARISE program meets the needs of our students with significant social and communication needs, which is primarily autism. The ABLE program meets the needs of our students who meet the criteria for alternative state assessments, primarily students with intellectual disabilities. And our PBS program meets the needs for students with more significant social, emotional, and behavioral needs. Both our ABLE and ARISE programs are in our title and non-title schools. So I have broken down just kind of where are our schools by title and non. You'll see that we do have a fairly good, what's the word I'm looking for? We have it nicely spread out. We are missing some PBS. If you look at this graph, it looks like we need a PBS program in the north. We have our ATC, or Adult Transition Center, at Cactus. And there in red, you'll see ALT. Those are students who take the alternative AZ Merit or the MSAA.
I do have a question on this.
Yes.
Question. When was the last time we revisited where these programs are hosted, and how did we determine that school was a particular good fit for that community or environment?
That's a great question. And I think that there's probably a couple different reasons. I know that they do try to look at the locations because each one of those is a feeder school for a variety. If we look at the elementary schools, they're a feeder school, so you want to look at the geographical location of the schools. And also, Superintendent Pallas-Thompson may be able to answer this better with the history, but I also believe a lot of it does have to do with capacity at the schools, because you do need to have a significant amount of room. And the most recent would be our ARISE program. Just 6 years ago, the ARISE program and a PBS program were both housed at Skyview, and the ARISE program was moved out to 2 locations, and now it's at 3. So we do try to make sure that geographically we are spread out. But it is if you have a student at Vistancia, it can be a long drive, for example, to a school.
So you bring up a good point. So if the last time we looked at one program was 6 years ago, but our trends are increasing year over year, what would be your recommendation that we revisit if these programs are where they need to be, best location to serve our students?
Yeah, it is a conversation we're definitely going to have because we are, our numbers are going to continue to grow. We want to focus on some of our non-title schools, so we do have our schools spread out, our programs spread out, geographically equal, but again, it's a capacity for a lot of our schools. And we are in conversation, I know, with our ABLE program to kind of look at boundaries as well.
Mr. Sandoval, did you have a question? I can
You know me too well.
I can read your body language.
So a couple questions. One, and I think it's really just going to kind of piggyback off of what President Martinez just spoke about. So I see a note, need a PBS program in North, and you mentioned that as well. I mean, what is needed to actually have a PBS program, a successful one?
Great.
Is it, structural, staff, et cetera? I mean,
yes, all of that.
All of the above. Okay.
Well, and, we want to be mindful not to have too many specialized classrooms at a school. I know that I can speak for the coordinators and myself. We believe that 6 would be the maximum that should be at one site. So if we start looking at more than 6 classrooms at a school, we need to start looking at other locations. Because our main goal is integration. We want those students to be able to integrate into general education classrooms. So if we have too much, if we just don't want to have too many, we don't want it to be lopsided. We don't want to just inundate our general education classrooms as well. So we need to make sure we have a cap at 6. But it also takes capacity as well in the schools.
Sure, gotcha. So I know we're going to get into staffing a little bit later, but when we take a look at, every site, and, and I've always said every site has a story, right? So we need to understand that. And you look at counselors, psychologists, intervention specialists, et cetera. Do you feel right now that our sites are properly staffed with regard to the services that those positions offer, right? I guess, do we have any gaps in services with regards to some of our sites, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think I can speak for all of us, that we do staff our programs well. We have about an 8 to 1, 8 to 10 students per teacher, and then we have, depending on the grade level, 1 to 2 assistants in the classrooms. We do have behavior interventionists, BCBAs, depending on what the programs are. We do staff those programs well. I mean, I do believe that we are missing a layer of support because, between the school and here, between the school and our coordinators, but they have fairly good support especially in our specialized programs, yes.
Okay, no, thank you for that. And I guess my next question really is similar to what Ms. Saya mentioned around, how the parents and the student voices are integrated into, the best path to take to put their student in a position to be successful. Those conversations, how are those conversations had with the sites? Or, to understand, because they're in front of their kids every day, right? So they're in the trenches and they see what they see, and we know what we don't know, or we don't know what we don't know here at the district level. How does that communication channel, that line of communication work? Is it fluid to understand, if a site now needs a different service, for their kids? Is that a pretty seamless process, I guess, between the site and the district?
These are great questions for our coordinators because they are in the trenches with the parents at the sites. I don't know, does anybody want to answer that one? Okay.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Sandoval. I think that IEP team comes together and has that conversation and what the needs of that student are captured in their IEP. And then it's our responsibility as a district and an IEP team to provide that support, whether it's through technology, additional resources, different curricular approaches, and instructional or intervention approaches. It's based on that IEP team's decision on what's best for that student.
Gotcha. Okay. Last question, I promise. We have a lot of growth in this area. How are we adapting? Where do we see opportunities, for us to be successful in serving our kids at all levels?
Absolutely. So one of my tasks as the new director this year was to fight hard for positions, and we were able to be awarded, I believe, 32 additional positions this year, which is amazing, and thank everyone for that. So we can look at our staffing model and the support that we have in our schools. So that's a starting place. We need to have the support in the classrooms in order to start that growth.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all.
Ms. Underhill?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Did you say that there was a layer of support between the school and the district missing? And can you just explain that a little bit?
Sure. Special educators, it's a tough job. Some of our schools have anywhere from, if I look at just resource and take out our specialized programs, which specialized programs, as I said, they do have a lot of support. Matter of fact, we have our ABLE program lead sitting over here, and we have strategists for our programs, and we have we feel like we have a lot of good support. But when we look at our resource students, which that is our greatest percentage of students, we have the resource teachers, and we have psychologists. We may have a behavior interventionist or not, but I personally feel like we're missing some of just that support, whether it's at the school, somebody who's kind of the lead of special ed, or the person that's the expert, whether it's just for that school or for a cluster of schools. We have the teacher. We do have 3 resource coaches for 42 schools, and then we have 5 coordinators, and their jobs are very big. So that's the layer of support that I do feel, compared to some of our other districts, that we could use to help with their growth.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know just from being in the classroom that, our resource teachers were very overburdened, which made it challenging for everybody. So, okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Ms. Pangarelli? Ms. Stone?
Right now, thanks.
Okay. No. All right. We're good to go to the next slide.
I never know if it's me or Smith. All right, so who are the staff? So our school administrators, general education teachers, and counselors play a vital role in the education of our special education students. It takes a diverse group of educators and specialists to support the needs of a wide variety of students. If we break down the 728 special education staff members, we have 235 classified staff, 484 certified staff members, and only 2 administrators. Our special education coordinators hold a teacher's contract, which is not in alignment with their job roles and responsibilities. We are very proud of the level of support we are able to give our schools, given the complexity of serving the needs of diverse learners in a large district. So we do have, it's a lot of staff, and we do provide we provide professional development. A lot of these staff members are school site based. Some of them we call district-wide because they support all schools. So it's a lot of staff.
Pingerelli?
Oh, I just wanted to get those numbers again. This was 235 certified and
235 classified.
classified, okay.
Mhm. Most of those are instructional assistants or paraprofessionals.
Okay.
We have 484 certified staff members, which those are teachers and related service members.
Okay.
And then the 2 administrators.
Thank you.
Yes.
I do want to address this particular slide. So I appreciate these numbers, and I did send a question for an organization chart. Because it is challenging. One thing from the governing board is we do get phone calls and who's the go-to person to, one, be accountable for responding, and 2, if we have a question, here's where you need to direct. I know that on our district website, we have a phenomenal executive chart, but it's nice to see where our special education lies under. Go ahead.
Excuse me.
No.
But I'm realizing you probably wanted schools on that organizational chart.
It could be in any way. What I think about as a parent, if my home school has their own, I could go find my parent, because a typical parent who's not familiar with the district administration office is going to go to their school website. So whatever is appropriate for them, so that they can see, okay, I have some concerns. I need to start with square one, which is at my home site. I would like to see going forward something like that implemented, in addition to something like this at the district office. Who is responsible if it's a transportation for our special needs and the buses? Is who owns that? Is it Mr. Camacho with the transportation, or is it special ed because it's in their IEP? Who's owning that? So I would like to see that going forward. And I just want to clarify, you mentioned that we have enough staff, but then when discussing resources or that middle layer, it sounded to me that we're missing some vital staff. These wonderful people are specifically related to special ed. However, if the goal is most of our students to be in a regular ed classroom, I think about what special training, professional development, where's the bridge for those? And they're not listed, even though we service 5,200 plus students, they should be a part of this conversation in this organization chart, because if that child, most of our children are getting their special ed needs met through the general classroom, or that is the goal, where is that piece in the conversation, that partnership? And I also don't see, which we've mentioned before, is community advocates and partnerships. We've discussed behavior, Southwest Behavior, are they part of it? Jewish Family Services, are they part of that? DDD, I know we signed waivers for Maricopa County Access. Is that part of the conversation, raising special kids? What is our role with those partnerships, and where do they fit in the organization chart?
It's a great question. The community supports are definitely advocates, and they do come to the table when parents request them. We reach out to Raising Special Kids if we need to. It's definitely a layer of the support that's offered when they're at the table at those IEP meetings. I don't know if any of you have additional.
When each IEP team case manager is inviting that parent and their partners to the table to meet for the IEP, they are reaching out and asking if they're connected with DDD or outside agencies and letting them know in that invitation to come to that IEP meeting that all of their partners are welcome to come, and they ask who would they be bringing. So it is brought up, and they are encouraged to bring those partners to be a part of that team.
It's in one of the slides in the coming up, but we have our PEP, which is our Peoria Education Parents. Oh, now I just lost it. It's our Exceptional Parents, Peoria Exceptional Parents workshops that we do quarterly, and we do bring in many of those organizations and vendors that you're referring to.
And one more question in regards to this wonderful support team, funding. Who funds what part? I know you mentioned IDEA, federal, state, what percentage? So that when we look at staffing models from the governing board and we approve 32 plus positions, is that part of the M&O? Is that part of something the state funds? Is that part of the federal?
Mm-hmm. I'm probably going to refer to our CFO to respond.
President Ceja Martinez, members of the governing board, there is local funding from M&O that is actually increased with the weight for special needs students as well as IDEA, but our staffing model is from our M&O funds.
Okay. So for our M&O funds, and if we have an increase or decrease, that will have a direct impact of how much services we can provide to our students if it comes from that source. Is that correct?
Correct, and I'll refer back to Mrs. Harper this evening, but as far as IDEA, we have our tuition out schools primarily, as well as some positions, but all of our related service providers are in M&O.
Correct. We do have our IDEA grant that we are able to utilize. It's the above and beyond what the state provides. And so we do pay for our tuition out or our private placement through our IDEA grant. We buy a lot of, we use that for a lot of our needs, professional development. We just purchased a lot of iPads. So we do have that amount of money that is in above what the state gives us.
Future, if we can get a report, just a simple board Friday report of the funding sources on what Peoria Unified funds in the M&O versus the federal versus anything else that we should consider when funding these types of positions.
We'll certainly provide that.
Thank you. Mr. Sandoval?
So a quick question from a staff in regard. Over the last couple of board meetings, I've noticed that we've saw a good number of psychologists and now instructional assistants leave the district. Any thoughts on why that may be?
I do. I would say, and I believe Dr. Davidson would probably agree, that I would say that it's because of our compensation. That's the feedback that is provided to me. At this time, unfortunately, our wages are not competitive, especially with our related services such as our psychologist, our speech pathologist, even for our teachers, because they are in high demand because there's a shortage of special education staff, even nationwide, but especially in Arizona. And so we do have to contract out for different services because we have to have positions filled.
And I would imagine if we're using a third party to help staff these positions, we're paying them more than what we'd be paying our associates.
Correct.
So would it make sense, and I think this will impact a couple, reasons why individuals would stay is, so I'm going to make these numbers up. I'm going to just say if we're paying this organization $25 an hour versus $12 an hour that we're paying an employee, an instructional assistant, if we split the difference, right, and called it, $16, $17, $18 an hour for instructional assistants. I know there's benefits, dollars or, certainly expenses to consider there as well. But I think, one, it's going to allow us to retain, individuals that we hired for these roles who we felt were right for the position. for a longer term. And two, now we have individuals who have skin in the game, who have passion, who are committed and loyal to the district and our students versus an outside organization whose potentially, whose culture, values, et cetera, may not be, what we have here at Peoria, as a thought. I mean, with that makes
I do not
sense.
disagree with you, and I know that our compensation is being looked at in our phase 2 of the study, and I know that those are topics that are going to be addressed.
Mr. Sandoval, I would also like the board to take a look at the audit report that we got back in 2017 with Dr. Stifler, Exhibit 3113. It highlights the attrition rate within our district, specifically in the special ed. And general attrition for even private to public company, it is anywhere between 12 to 14%. And we would highlight, I had a conversation with Dr. Davidson, that is what generally we are running with our general ed teachers. However, if you look specifically at our special ed, we're looking at, in our elementary school sites, 24% attrition rate. That is detrimental to the relationship of our student. That is detrimental to the school climate, the resources, and the amount of money that we're losing by investing in new employees and watching that turnover. So as we consider how we're going to fund future of employees and what's best for our kids, 24% for attrition rate is not good for student learning.
I would have to say that many special needs kids kind of just shut down when they have to have a new teacher. They regress very badly. So this is an area that, in regards to student learning and success, we really need to take a look at.
And if I may, one of the solutions, or at least a Band-Aid on that problem, was with that additional staffing, we did look at our resource staffing, our per pupil, right, or the ratio, what it was in the past. We were looking at 25 students to 1. We did change that practice, and we're now looking at 17 to 22 students per teacher, which hence why we needed 14 additional teachers at our elementary and 12 additional teachers at our high school, because we did look at that ratio, which could also be one of the reasons why the teachers, we do have those teachers leaving. So we did try to lower those case numbers.
Thank you for highlighting it. Thank you, Mr. Sandoval. Any additional comments by the governing board? Okay. All right. Move on to the next slide.
All right, so the disabilities we serve. The vast majority of our students are identified as students with specific learning disabilities. To meet the criteria of a student with a learning disability, the student must demonstrate a discrepancy between their IQ and academic achievement scores in areas such as reading, writing, mathematics, oral language, and listening comprehension. Speech-language impairment is oftentimes associated with students with articulation errors, meaning the inability to produce sounds such as the TH and the S. However, students with language impairment may also demonstrate difficulty with expressive and receptive language skills and social pragmatics, meaning the context of language. And I'm emphasizing that because you'll notice that we do have that is our second highest area of need. Other health impairments encompasses students with ADHD and any other medical disorder that impacts strength, vitality, and alertness. Autism is definitely on the rise and has continued to increase primarily due to the improvements in evaluation and early identification. Developmental delay is used only for students under the age of 10 who are slow to meet or not reaching milestones in 2 or more of the following areas of development: communication, physical, cognitive, and adaptive skills. As you can see, we serve a very wide range of disabilities. Okay. All right, In by 3. In by 3 is an Arizona state mandate which requires school districts to evaluate children and have any necessary programs and services in place before the child turns 3 years of age, anytime during the school year. The majority of these students are referred to us through AZIP, which is Arizona Early Intervention Program. AZIP is a state agency that provides early intervention services for children birth to 3 years of age. And as you can see from the slide, that our AZIP referrals and parent referrals totaled over 500 this year, and all 500 of those students were evaluated by our assessment team. And by the fall of 2019, our preschool numbers are at an all-time high. We're going to have 204 developmental and 160 community preschool students. And then on the other end of the continuum, we have our transition planning for students ages 16 to 22. In support of transition planning, Peoria has partnered with vocational rehabilitation for the purpose of facilitating seamless transitions of students with disabilities from high school to the world of work in order to maximize their employability and integration into the workforce and community. We offer transition school to work classes, or we call them TSW classes, in all of our high schools, which are courses structured to provide goal-oriented vocational educational services. Through our Adult Transition Center, or ATC, located at Cactus High School, students who meet criteria are provided the opportunity to continue receiving transition services in a community-based instructional program. Due to the work of our transition team in partnership with Voc Rehab, Peoria can celebrate that we have 92% of our students 1 year out of high school, and these are special education students, out of high school engaged in higher education, competitive employment, or other education and training. We're actually recognized as being a leader in Arizona because the state average is only 75%.
Just real quick, I know that Mr. Bauer shared tonight about JAG. Do you mind, is there any insight why JAG is not in this list? I know Mr. Bauer's already gone.
It's not a special education
Not special.
program.
Can special ed students participate?
Have you had?
They have in the past? Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, good question. All right, data. Arizona, this chart demonstrates that, so this chart first is Arizona merit and MSAA proficiency or passing rates. It demonstrates that in 2018, we have a higher number of students passing the AZ merit and MSAA, which is a multi-state alternate assessment, than the state average in both ELA and math. We're similar to our neighboring districts to the west and north. While the achievement gap between students and disabilities and all students appears to be significant, it is important to keep in mind that special education students have disabilities that impact their learning. Research shows that the more time a special education student participates in general education core academic instruction, students will perform higher on standardized tests and be exited from special education services at a higher rate than students participating less than 80% of the school day. This research helps guide our goal to maximize the amount of time our students spend in general education classes accessing core content instruction from content experts. So I know there's a lot of data on here, and at first, I'm looking at it, and but we have work to do. We would like to lower that gap, but we also know that we need to look at maximizing the time that our students are with the content experts, which are our general education teachers.
With this particular slide, I did send over some questions, but I'll speak in just for seeking clarity. When we look at AZ Merit and the MSAA, there are universal accommodations versus other type of accommodations. Is that what you're referring to, why they're two different groups? Or can you please help me elaborate?
The MSAA is the state assessment that the students that were on that one chart that had the red, the ALT, the alternate, that's the test that they take. Because they are also, Joanne is our MSAA facilitator. I'm sure she'd love to share. But they do take it their 11th grade. Do you want to talk about the MSAA? Okay.
President Martinez, thank you for that question. MSA is given to students in 3rd through 8th grade at the elementary school and 11th grade in the high school. And those students are again identified as needing that type of assessment based on their IEP team decision, and most of those students are students that have been identified with an intellectual disability or an IQ and adaptive scores below 70. and their instruction is so modified that they would not be able, they're not successfully accessing that general education curriculum, and therefore would not be able to be assessed through that AZ merit and show appropriate growth and progress.
Thank you for that. When we look at this data, and I appreciate you bringing in our peer districts, have you had an opportunity to see, is the funding, is the program model the same? How are we differentiating? If Peoria has the most expensive the model and our scores are outperforming, is it a result because we're spending more money? Does another school district do it better, essentially, with less funds? What questions have come up in this peer-to-peer conversation?
I definitely need more time to research that, because there are a lot of factors, and it does appear that the districts that have less title perform better in general ed and in special ed. The funding, we all receive the state funding and our IDA grant, so there's different models for sure. But I do need more time to research that to compare the districts.
I think that the governing board should consider then as a future study session, specifically student success in our model to serve our students compared to our peer districts. If we're going to compare what's the best use of every dollar for this group of students.
Absolutely. And I do things that interest me, however, if I compare to Deer Valley, for example, if we look at the students with disabilities in Peoria in 2018 with a 15% pass rate, and I look at Deer Valley with a 16% pass rate, they do not have a block schedule, so I can't say whether or not, that's not necessarily impacting. So it is similar, and it is also important to keep in mind that we do exit about 400 students from special education a year. We do bring in more, there's more that are evaluated, but we do exit students as well throughout the year. So those students who, are exited also are not reflected in our data. So we do have successes, but this is the students on that day that were identified.
Take a pause. Ms. Pingerelli, you have a question?
Oh, I just had, I know we hit the disabilities that we serve where you had the breakdown. And you mentioned that autism was increasing. Is there another group? I guess, what is the main groups that are increasing, statewide and national?
OHI, the other health impairments,
Okay.
especially specifically with the ADHD, is increasing, and also the autism. That seems to be comparable nationwide.
Thank you.
Ms. Underhill?
Yeah, I was just curious about that too. Like, if you have students that are have co-occurring things, how are they then classified? Is it like a primary?
Yes, what is on the list, that's their primary disability.
Okay.
A lot of our students, I probably even want to say most of our students maybe, have two. We have a primary and a secondary disability.
Okay.
But so that one is just the primary disability.
Okay. And then the other thing I noticed is, as you were saying, you've got a strategist, you've got 3 strategists for RISE and 3 for PBS, which I'm sure are very needed, but there's only 3 for, the resource. So that to me seems like an area where that's our largest population. So were those positions, how long have they been there? Do we need to look at restructuring that? What are they, do that? Seems like a pretty important position, so.
Resource assistance,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. More strategists, yes. We probably do, absolutely. I will say that we have one of our positions that's open right now that we're trying to fill, because it's important to me that the school positions are filled first before we fill those positions. So, I agree with you, that we could use more support from the strategists. We also, that layer that I was referring to, even if it was a cluster of schools for one, support strategist just for a cluster. We
Right.
definitely, that is on my agenda to look at, because we do need to offer more support. But it is also important to keep in mind that the ARISE program, the PBS, and the ABLE, they are their needs are significant.
Sure,
so that's
absolutely.
why that support is needed. Many of them support the teachers, and they're in the classrooms to give daily support on how to handle different needs.
Just positions, are those something that was new with the new positions that were added, or is that similar to an instructional coach, or?
Yes, the name was changed, I think last year or the year before, from coach to strategist, just so we could separate curriculum and instruction coaches with our special ed. So we call them strategies, because really they are teaching the teachers strategies. So it's just kind of our play on words. But those were not the only position that I added out of those positions. That this year was the ABLE lead position, because we did need more support with our ABLE program. It is our largest program.
Great. And then just one more question, just because I've, been in IEPs and seen all of the documentation and that kind of thing that goes on. Has there been any discussion around how do we make sure that the documentation side of the job is not, I've seen those resource folks and they're all hours of the night, you know what I mean? So how do you balance that? I know it's a smaller number of students per teacher, but how can we better, improve that process?
Right. Well, and sometimes it's not. If they have 25 students on their caseload,
right.
It is a balance. Resource teachers, they're not teaching content necessarily. They're pulling kids to provide services. So, they're not having to necessarily lesson plan for a 50-minute lesson, but they are providing services for each of the students' needs. It is a balance. One of the recommendations that I've been sharing with principals is to look at that modified Monday. Because of the way we flip-flop with our specials at the elementary schools, that's a good day to perhaps, not see students. If they can see them during the rest of the week, that might be a day that they can work on their IEPs. They can pull students for academic testing that they also need to do. So, we need to be creative, because you're right. I always called it, when I was a teacher, it was the 160% job. 80% of our time was on paperwork and 80% of time was with students. How do you balance that? So we do have, we have a lot of work, we have a lot of training, because they do need, that support. That's what our coordinators work very closely as well on the compliance end. We do have a full-time compliance coordinator who also is researching, looking at our files, our IEPs, to see where we need additional training and where we need that support. Yeah.
Ms. Doe, Mr. Sandoval, on this slide, or the other slides? Okay. All right, keep going.
All right, the next slide is our AZ Merit growth, which I, as a former principal, I liked growth data. It meant more to me sometimes than proficiency. And overall, we are pleased with the results of the growth data for the past 2 years, even though there are a lot of factors that could explain the decrease in scores from 2017 to 2018. Comparison of our all students to students with disabilities, you can see that there is not a significant difference between the growth scores. With that being said, the more time students spend in general education, the potential for growth could and should increase. And so if I use Mike Moss's 50% growth, it should be technically a year growth. So, I was happy when I saw this. There's room to grow, but it was closer than I was expecting. Okay. All right. So Dr. Bell shared a similar graph a couple of months ago in her overview presentation of student success. Tiers 1, 2, and 3 are where all of our students are educated. Interventions need to be strategic and intensive to maximize learning. When these interventions do not result in significant student progress, students are evaluated to determine if they meet special education eligibility. Hit this slide, please. So that's where, in special education, we do actually have a Tier 4, and that's what's provided in special education. A lot of times we do look at that pyramid and we talk about Tiers 1, 2, and 3. That's what all students receive, special ed and general ed. But in Tier 4, in Tier 4 is special education. What happens after service delivery model, it does not necessarily work in those other 3 tiers. Questions? Okay. All right, so next steps. So our continued focus on compliance to state and federal laws. So next year is our monitoring year for the Arizona Department of Education, and due to our success with our file review this year, we're on self-monitoring review next year. Compliance to federal and state laws which guide our practices in special education will always be one of our top priorities. Not only is compliance critical to meet student needs, but compliance is also vital to ensure continued funding from state and federal levels. Our next is increased training for administrators, teachers, related services, and classified staff. One new initiative that we are moving forward with next year is our Aspiring Special Education Leadership Academy. Our coordinators are spearheading this because we do want to build our own, and we want to build the capacity of our special education teachers and staff. And we do strive for best practices and ongoing professional development. We know it is key to ensure our staff stays current. Our third bullet there, compensation study, phase 2, retention and attraction. And as I mentioned before, the Peoria, unfortunately, is not a leader when it comes to teacher or related service provider pay. And the one side effect of not having competitive wages, we are forced to utilize non-district hired contract staff to fill position. While these individuals are highly qualified professionals, and I make sure they are, the same as our Peoria staff members, it does demonstrate that we need to be competitive in our wages to attract and retain district employees. And so next bullet, we have co-teaching training for high school teachers. So co-teaching is a passion of mine. As a former high school co-teacher, I was a high school special ed co-teacher myself. We're excited to be sending 2 special education and 2 general education certified staff members to a training for trainers in July. And Brenda is actually spearheading that initiative. And we'll be starting this fall in training high school staff for this model. So I'm very excited about that. Next, as mentioned, we have a Partnering with Exceptional Parents quarterly workshops. And Partnering with Exceptional Parents was started by my assistant director, Nancy Williams, in April of 2018. This year, we held 4 evening workshops on topics such as growing up with DDD, VR transition services, turning 18 legal options, and Be Safe, training for students with autism in partnership with the Peoria Police Department. And lastly, we have our focus on teaching tools and strategies in all schools to better support students with specialized instruction to enhance student success. And that is all of our strategists, our leads are always focused on making sure our staff is well trained. So that concludes the presentation, and we're open to any questions or comments.
Perfect, thank you. And Governing Board, we do have one public comment, Ms. Erin Robinson. So the next step is we'll have a guest speaker or a 3-minute time clock, and then we'll go ahead, Governing Board, and continue and ask any more questions. Okay. Ms. Erin Robinson.
Good evening, President Ceja Martinez, Governing Board, Superintendent Linda Pellis-Thompson. My name's Erin Robinson. I'm a parent and a general education 6th grade teacher. I have taught 11 years in Peoria, and I've taught 15 years in several other states. I have a few questions pertaining to the next steps slide. The first item I would like to refer to are the teacher tools and strategies in schools to better support our students. My question is, what might general ed and resource teachers do if they feel they have exhausted all teacher tools and strategies to support the special ed education students and have gone through the correct chain of command with very little guidance and support? Starting with the school psychologist, the principal, the district coordinator, and finally the director of special ed. In general, if the general ed teachers play a vital role in the process, then why couldn't we even schedule a meeting when we asked several times to collaborate for the next step to ensure success for our students? One of the many communication breakdowns among all staff that we have experienced this year is when we found out at the end of the year a student had been exited from the ELA pullout program by a coordinator without the knowledge or input of general ed or resource teachers. Therefore, this student continued in the program for 2.5 months of the school year. Moving forward, there obviously needs to be more transparency among all general ed, special ed, and district team members so we can work all together and work toward our common goal to do what's best for our children. The second item I would like to refer to in the slide is the compliance issue. What is the procedure for monitoring all schools to ensure that they meet the criteria for state compliance? But most importantly, what happens when the general education team is fully aware that our students' needs are not being met from specific people in the school, such as behavior specialists, school psychologists, testing coordinators, speech, etc. And they are not being met because protocol is not being followed. In many instances this year, our team again went through the correct chain of command, but was shut down, ignored. Meanwhile, multiple children paid the price of not getting the help they deserved. In conclusion, I hope PUSD can close that gap within the community of all of our general education teachers, special education teachers, and leaders, increase the accountability, and improve the transparency.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing special education to be a focus for next year.
Thank you. So following through with the next step item is to open it up to the governing board for any additional comments or questions in what was presented. We'll go ahead and start with Ms. Underhill.
So I keep going back to this co-teaching thing, and I know you kind of explained it, but can you just give me a little more? Like, what does that mean? What does that entail? What does that mean from a resource standpoint? That kind of thing.
Brenda, do you want to take this? Yes. So co-teaching, it's kind of what it sounds, right? It's a general education teacher and a special education teacher. Most of the time, the co-teaching models are typically in high schools because of just the way that the schedule lays out. We do want to have push-in, we call it push-in in elementary school, but the co-teaching is really a high school focus. So there's a lot of different models of co-teaching. When it's done well, it is actually two teachers facilitating two people in front of the class. Our model is to have 1/3 of the students, no more than 1/3 would have IEPs, would be in special education, and then 2/3 would be general education. I know when I was a teacher, I did algebra and geometry. I was in co-taught, and I loved it. If it's done well, you see the students in a grocery store, and they introduce you to their parent, and they say, "Mom, this is my teacher, Mrs. Harper." And I'm thinking, that's a general education student. What's that? What's his name again? So when it's done well, they think that it's a benefit of having two teachers. I know as the resource teacher, you should be the strategy expert. So they might be, I know when I was in the classroom, we would give a test. I would pull students, gen ed and special ed, who maybe needed to have more skill development. You pull a small group in the back, you reteach a skill. The special ed teacher is maybe the one that, helps if there's, specific strategies. We used a lot of organizational folders and different ways to teach algebra and geometry. So when it's done well, it is a true partnership. And they should both have the content knowledge. I'll be honest, I did not know geometry. I had to learn it. But, it should be a true partnership. And really the advantage is having those students exposed to the general education content by a content expert. I was not a math major. I was a special education major. So you need that math content expert.
And that sounds awesome. So how can that, would we be able to shift enough courses into that model without having, multiplying our teaching positions, I guess is what I'm saying. How do we do that?
Well, and I do want to stress, I don't know if Mr. Bauer is still here, we do have co-teaching in our high schools now. I do not want to make it sound like they do not have any. We do have it now. We just want to have more. But what should happen is that there should be a shift from, instead of having one co-taught class for English 1 and 3 resource classes for English 1. We need to shift that, so we have 3 co-taught and 1. It's the same amount of staff, it's just a different model. And if you think we want 80% of our students, or even 75% of our students in general ed, that's how we make it happen, because then we take them out of that classroom that's self-contained.
Got it, that was helpful.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And then my last question is just on the lines of that, the whole professional development piece. So I'm not sure on this org chart, like, do the coordinators work together to create this the professional development kind of pathway for our special ed team? And secondly, is there, some crossover between our gen ed folks and our special ed and how we can work together in the classroom?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Dr. Bell and I, we've had a conversation even today about really aligning that professional development, because I want to make sure that the special ed teachers are provided the same opportunities, first of all, for general education training, if there's foundations training or iReady training, that they have that training first. And then we, as a department, we look at then what training we can provide and what we need to add to it. For example, if you think of school psychologists, school psychologists usually need professional development by a school psychologist. So we do have those pockets of training as well. But as far as the teachers, we do look at what the needs are, what curriculum instruction is offering, so then we can embed and we can move in. And it's kind of a new approach. I'm the new director, so I do have a lens that we do need to definitely have that crossover. And I know Dr. Bell and I are definitely looking at that, because there's a lot of professional development that's needed.
That's great. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Ms. Pingarelli?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Mr. Sandoval?
Yes, thank you. So the last bullet on the next step slide refers to teaching tools and strategies in all schools, right? One of the things that we continue to talk about and within any organization is our continuous improvement model, right? So I think when training first is realized and it cascades down to those individuals at the site level, then it becomes a matter of how do we always stay up to date on the training? How do we understand what new technologies, products, services are out there with regard to special education? Is there a group within your team, I guess, that understands, when this new technology process, whatever, these best practices that are the latest and greatest come down, and does that team go site to site? How does that work, if you don't mind?
Yeah, well, the coordinators are definitely, we consider our experts. They are the top, well, and hopefully the 2 directors are as well, but we need to first and foremost be the experts in special education. And then we do have our different level, as you see in that, with our operations staff. We have very passionate people who are constantly researching. They belong to different organizations nationwide and with the state to stay current. A matter of fact, we have an assistive technology team that is top-notch, and they present nationwide with presenting different, you mentioned technology, with different assistive technology device, and they're also experts in the field. So I think it's important to make sure you have surrounded by people who are passionate and they have that energy and that motivation to share with others what they learn. A lot of however, you did mention also with the school site, because we do have a lot of schools. In a perfect world, we would have training at every site, every week. I would love to do that. So it is a work in progress to make sure that we do provide the training that everybody needs.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so could you give me a brief description of how a student with an IEP that is like 80% in regular classes, how is that coordinated among gen ed and special ed? How does teachers from both sides attend the IEP?
Yes, yes, it's required actually by law that at least one general education teacher is on that IEP team meeting, is part of that IEP team.
Okay.
And so part of that you mentioned with the coordination, the special ed teacher is responsible to make sure that information is shared with all of the teachers that, work with that student. We actually now even have it in our IEP Pro system that parents can actually go in and view as well. So we even now have a portal in our IEP. But the special ed teacher is responsible. Part of their job is to make sure that the general ed teachers have the information that they need.
Can you explain that? When my child was doing IEPs, I was always a critical part of developing the IEP.
Yes.
Has that changed?
Absolutely not.
So what is this portal?
Oh, it's just to view the IEP, correct? Yeah. Yeah, once it's completed, because a lot of times parents, they, lose their copy or they want to go back and see. It's just so they can have access to it. Same as like going and looking at.
So something online that they
yes,
can.
Yes.
Okay, that was confusing for a minute.
Sorry.
So let's see. That question was answered, and that one. Now, it says, is it a federal regulation that all of our special needs children be tested?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The minimum is every 3 years. They're reevaluated. But we do have our child find obligation to, if a parent asks for an evaluation or their child to be tested, it is our obligation to hold a meeting to determine next steps.
Okay, and I was amazed when I went through to see how many children on IEPs were doing the regular testing, regular testing. It blew my mind because that's a very difficult test.
Yes.
And these young people work hard, and I think it's very stressful, and sometimes that's an issue.
Yes.
This has been very interesting for me, and a lot of my questions were answered as we came down the line. So I appreciate everybody digging in and working on this. And I like to think, I'm especially interested in the compensation issue right now, because visiting the classrooms and talking to the teachers, it's been a serious stress on them. And I like that we have hired some new people, and I think we should hire some more because those classes are still too big.
Yes.
Now, do the teachers that are contracted to Peoria know that the other teachers that are not, that are third party, do they know that?
They probably do, yes. I've talked to schools, and first I want to back up that this 2 years ago was one of the first years that we hired one contracted teacher, and it was actually at my school. Last year that we just ended in 18-19, we had 4 contracted teachers. So it is a new era that we're in, and a lot of people are choosing to go contracted, one for the wages. We're having a lot of retired teachers that they don't have to participate in ASRS, and so they're going that model, that route. In some states, almost New Mexico, for example, we keep getting a lot of traveling teachers from New Mexico. It just seems to be the model that they just hire contracted teachers. This year, I do anticipate that we're going to have probably 12 to 15 contracted teachers. And these are, so far we've been very impressed. We got ahead of the game, so we were able to get in and get some of the strong applicants and candidates. And we are a large district, so the contract agencies want to work with Peoria.
And I appreciate that, and I understand, and I think it's getting us some, like if they're a retired teacher, they have a lot of experience, they know
Absolutely.
what's going on. But I'm wondering if that kind of situation, that dynamic might lead to loss of teachers current in our system because they see that that's there.
It's possible. We've been using contracted psychologists and contracted speech pathologists for many years.
Right.
And so the the teacher is just kind of a new aspect of the contractors. We also use contracted itinerant assistants from different agencies as well. So we've been using, but just the teacher it's kind of a new trend.
And if I could ask Ms. Myers, how does, is that something, how does that fund for contracted teachers? Is that right out of the regular funding for teachers?
It's M&O eligible, but also within the IDEA grant, we talked a little bit
Right.
about expenditures that are eligible there, and related service providers oftentimes are contracted as well.
Okay.
But it would be an M&O eligible funding source.
So that's good, because you're right. I mean, by law, we have to provide these services. We have to have these teachers, so.
Correct.
I think that getting into the nitty-gritty with that's probably a good idea. I'd hate to lose, some of the experienced people that we're contracting, but that's a good idea to get into. I think most of the rest of my questions were answered. That the numbers growing, you said that's more because of more rigorous searching, if you will, finding children when they're younger, as far as the population growth of children in special needs.
Right, absolutely. And that seems to be nationwide, especially with, when I highlighted the AZIP that we have with the early intervention and that push, that wasn't around,
So that is growing percentage-wise in comparison to Gen Pop students that are special needs.
Correct.
So, okay. But it's on a par with the rest of the states.
Correct, and I'm very excited with our MTSS model, because I'm doing some research for this presentation. I have been digging and finding out that, in fact, that states and districts that do have strong MTSS models with that multiple tiers system of support, they are actually seeing a decrease. Because that's what we want. We want our students out of special education. We want to provide them that support that they can get when they're in the general education classroom, so they don't need that services. So, as we build our MTSS model, we're hopeful that we will see it go back the other way.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. I think that's all I have tonight.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so just to piggyback on that part of that question, or that transition, and I'm just going to say it out loud, because when we think about if somebody qualifies for an IEP or a 504, it's because it's identified disability. Just because we exit them out doesn't mean that that disability went away. So for truly doing our due diligence and our testing, that they're always going to need support services, and if we exit them for whatever reason, it could be a parent choice, it could be the student does not want to participate, maybe that's not the best environment for them, the student still needs support services, and if the only one who's going to give it is the regular ed teacher and they're not offered the correct professional development in the behavior management piece, in the teaching model, I have concerns with that. I know I lived it. So I would really consider how we as a district and this governing board have a study session in the future. How do we want to handle and work in the best scenario of the student? Is even though we've exit them, does not mean that they don't need support services in place.
Correct.
So I wanted to highlight that, which takes funding, which takes support, which takes training, which comes from money, which we have a lot of decisions riding on in our future going forward.
Yes.
A couple things I wanted to circle back to is the continued focus on compliance, state and federal laws. I appreciate that you brought that up as a future line item. I know our finance audits, we get them in a nice packet, and it tells us what we're working on and what the measure is and what the focus. I would like to see that information as well, and looking at data trends for the past 3 years and how we're moving forward. It's obvious that our teachers, our regular ed teachers and our special ed department are spread thin. we have some opportunities to close those gaps where we're not compliant. So I would like to know any OCR reports, file complaints, any complaints at the state level, because we get those calls as well at the governing board level, some data trends reported to the governing board, and what is the special ed department going to focus on, the hows, and how you're going to measure that success. I know Mr. Gay has constantly said in our strategic plan is what is the measurement of success and how do we determine what is great progress, what is good progress, and what is not sufficient. The next bullet point says increased training for administrators, teachers in what? What is our focus? If we're going to look at our data, student data, and it's going to be in reading, then we're going to align that training. And what is the increase by? Are we saying we're moving our students in the AZ merit score? Are we exiting out more students? So really defining, my ask is going forward, really defining those measurements, the hows, what it looks like when we're successful, and that information as well. We had discussed retention, co-teaching, just to circle back to that one, in the audit. It's great to hear, Brenda, that you're going to circle on the PD training, because there are specific statements such as the special education teacher doesn't know the content area, so I appreciate you acknowledging that. That means a lot that you guys have identified that and you have a game plan. And so looking at what that measurement is, identifying roles and expectations sounds like a conversation needs to happen. And then I know my son's going to be in a biology co-taught class, and you are correct, Ms. Harper, that when you have a co-taught classroom and both teachers are content experts, it is the best experience for the teacher and a home run for the student.
Right.
That was one of my best years as having a co-taught classroom. Costs money, though. I do know that. And then if we're looking specifically at science, we already know that the state has a shortage in science teachers, biology and physics. Couple things we have not discussed that I saw in the report that I and my fellow governing board members have brought up that I want to make sure, my ask is that we do discuss this and address this and acknowledge is the disparities in behavior, suspensions, disciplinary action. Are looking at the report, it states that we have about 26% of our students identified in special ed, we have about 13 to 14% identified in special ed. However, we have double the suspension rates or the disciplinary action, and that, I believe, is as a result of inequities, maybe bias, maybe lack of training. And I think about behavior plans that we're so quick to give a suspension, and a 9-day suspension for our special ed kids. We need to really look at, is that in the best interest of the student if they're supposed to be in school, and their behavior plans. Another thing we haven't addressed is our substitute teachers. Right now we have a teacher shortage, and it is common to have a substitute teacher, and I know when I was a teacher and I have a substitute, I can probably guarantee that substitute is going to put one of my special ed students on that list, which is unfortunate because it doesn't feel good to the child, it's not good for the parent experience, and it starts to disengage the student. And we're talking about building relationships. So really looking at our substitute training, Dr. Davidson, when we look at special ed students, and how we move forward with supporting our substitutes for success so they have a positive experience. As well as the main focus is the student. I think that's it. We talked about block scheduling. The last piece, when I think about retention, so here's some positive news. If majority of our teachers, or the goal is to have a majority of our special ed students in a special ed classroom, there's called a teacher loan forgiveness. And a teacher loan forgiveness, when a teacher has a student who is identified special ed, they can do loan forgiveness up to $17,500. I would consider, I would like to have our HR department really look at, are there ways based on the federal government's request to meeting that loan forgiveness? Can we support, approve the data of whatever they're asking? to say that our regular ed teachers who support our special ed students can qualify for that loan forgiveness at the max amount of $17,500. The last time I checked, I know I qualified, so. Dr. Davidson?
I needed Ms. Meyer's magic touch there,
Yes.
but President Ceja Martinez, we do work closely with those teachers of ours that are eligible for reimbursement from the federal government for their federal loans. Certainly, I will dig into that a little bit more as it relates to the general ed perspective. Usually, we see it for both working on behalf of students with disabilities, but also with our Title I environments. Those are our two primary pieces, but I'll certainly look into that for us.
Thank you. And I just had one more thought, I promise. IEPs, they're the student-to-teacher ratio as students in a general ed classroom, and that when they start the school year, they are bombarded with a lot of work. I would like to see that there be specific time for every teacher to review IEPs, 504s, or any accommodations before they even start the school year, because that does not happen now. It does not.
Yeah.
So that's my only ask, or my last ask for right now. Well, I really appreciate it. I know we had a comment from the community about gifted. That is a conversation for a future agenda item. But thank you for all your time and hard work. And I know you're new, but you're not new, leading the charge. And we appreciate your candor and asking the governing board for what you need. And it sounds to me we need more relationship resources for our students.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You thought you were done. Just one quick question around the portal that Ms. Stone asked about.
Yes.
Is that also a tool that allows us to input information on how a student did? Is that a tool to allow us to communicate to our parents as well outside the IEP, but in a way to allow them to understand maybe how a day went with their student? And if not, how frequently do we communicate with our parents to let them understand how their student is doing?
Thank you, Mr. Sandoval, for the question. Essentially, it's more of a reporting system, so for the IEP and a way to access it. So the quarterly progress reports that are done for the students' IEP goals are available as they're updated each quarter. So that is some progress, but it's once a quarter. And then any further communication is really depends on the student, the IEP, and the need. So some students get it daily. We like that back and forth from home to understand what's going on in the home environment and how it might affect their school day, because we know that students just don't leave everything at home. They bring it with them,
Right.
And vice versa. We want to make sure that we're ensuring that parents are well informed about anything positive or troublesome that might have happened so that it can be addressed and we can continue to move forward with the student. Other students, it might be once a week. It just depends. So oftentimes that is agreed upon by the IEP team. There is an actual section where you have a conversation around how frequent and how often will there be communication with regard to the IEP. But I would also hope that any communication would occur just as it should with any general education teacher. If there is something that's going on, there's a question, that we should have those open doorways and emails, phone calls, et cetera, both directions. So.
Gotcha, perfect. And have we ever been confronted with any language barriers with our parents, meaning, some of our parents who are maybe Spanish preferred or dominant, or any other language for that matter? As we are confronted to those, we have the ability to speak in language.
Absolutely. We contract with an agency that provides interpreters in pretty much every language that is needed. And we can do those in person or over the phone telephonically. But we do provide interpreters. And we can provide written documents in other languages as well.
Perfect. It's good to hear that you don't use Google Translate for that. I'm just
No,
kidding.
I've tried doing it quick, but yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Enjoy your summer. We appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to 8.3, first reading of Arizona School Boards Association Policy Advisory Revision to Current Policy DIE.
I know, right?
Ms. Michelle Myers.
Well,
I didn't want to steal your joke.
thank you, President Ceja Martinez, members of the governing board. It is true. The audits and financial monitoring section of our policy is DIE, DIE. But with that, I am here this evening to remind the governing board that on August 23rd, 2018, we did bring forward an Arizona School Board Association policy advisory regarding that specific policy, DIE, and changes that were a result of the 2018 legislative session. The policy advisory last year was in response to House Bill 2663 that limited the use of the same auditor or audit firm for more than 3 consecutive years, and that an auditor or audit firm hired by a school district could not receive consulting fees in a payment form from that school district. So you'll recall we brought that change forward. Well, this requirement was legally modified during the 2019 legislative session, and the new 2019 law, Chapter 85, removed the auditor rotation requirement, and it also removed the language prohibiting auditors from receiving consulting service fees. The 2019 legislation had an emergency clause that made it effective immediately, and it was signed into law on April 11th, 2019. So tonight, we are accordingly bringing forward the reading of this change to policy DIE as an advisory from the Arizona School Board Association for your information and consideration. And as a reminder, the first read is tonight, and then we'll bring it back through consent for approval. And at this time, I'm available to answer your questions as best I can.
All right, we'll start off. Ms. Doan, any questions?
No, it looks straightforward to me.
Mr. Sandoval?
Yeah, no questions, but just a thought. The stricken line that says the district may not hire the same auditor or auditing firm for more than 3 consecutive years. I think, you tell me, I think as a best practice, I think it's always good to have different lenses, take a look, right? So even though it's stricken from here, but I think as a district, I think we certainly benefit from periodically having a different set of eyes, take a look.
And President Sarah Martinez, Mr. Sandoval, that is correct, and I agree. And with our procurement process, we actually do go out every 5 years through an RFP to evaluate audit firms. And through that solicitation, we hire a firm, and it's actually renewable year by year, up to 5 years. And I can also say that Peoria Unified does not use the same audit firm for consulting services. Our audit firm currently is Clifton Larson Allen, and we do use Heinfeld and Meach for our consulting services.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Welcome.
Ms. Pangarelli? Ms. Underhill? Okay, thank you. Okay, this is first read. Thank you very much for that information.
Well, thank you.
Moving on to 9.1. Excellent. Ms. Myers, report and discussion on local, state, and federal legislative issues and activities.
Thank you, and good evening again, President Ceja Martinez, members of the governing board. I thought I would stay at the podium because I would not be able to walk quickly enough back to my seat and to activate that microphone. So if you'll indulge me, I'll provide the legislative update from the podium this evening. And at our last board meeting at May 30th, I did share with the governing board that the first regular session of the 54th legislature did adjourn sine die on May 28th after 135 days in session. In addition to the final budget and school-related funding that I previously shared, other notable legislation has also now been signed into law from the session or will have a general effective date on August 27th, 2019. Tonight, just a few minutes ago, I've already mentioned one of these laws, which was the agenda item that I just covered regarding auditor rotation and consulting fee payments mentioned under policy DIE. But there is some other notable legislation I'd like to mention this evening. Laws 2019, Chapter 85, repealed Arizona Revised Statute 15213.04 and the requirement that the State Board of Education shall adopt rules for procurement by school districts of any materials, services, or goods and construction services that require contracts to be awarded based solely on the lowest qualified bidder. So this law was also already signed into law on April 11th, 2019 with an emergency clause, so it's already in effect. So that's a change, and you'll see a subsequent policy advisory update accordingly. And in addition, There is also information I'd like to share tonight regarding changes for tax credit, and this is rather exciting. House Bill 2425 expands the use of tax credit monies by school districts. From June 30th, 2019 to June 30th, 2022, schools will now have the ability to use tax credit funds to acquire capital items as defined in the Uniform System of Financial Records. To fund, in addition, they can use those monies to fund community school meals that are not covered by the National School Lunch Program, purchase student consumable health supplies, and purchase playground equipment and shade structures. And what's important with this is those capital purchases can be for use in the classroom or on campus. They're not restricted purely to extracurricular activities. So we'll be communicating this out to all of our schools. We're very excited. It will be impactful for the Peoria Unified School District. Again, the restriction not being applied just to extracurricular activities will help with the purchase of computers and other equipment and capital items for both use in the classroom and on our campuses. And that concludes my update for this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to 9.2, District Budget Report for the month of April of 2019. It is viewable online. 9.3, Budget Facilities Planning and Construction Report. It's also viewable online. Upcoming meetings and events. Ms. Linda Pellis-Thompson, is there anything you would like to highlight?
I think there were two things that we had. I'm sorry. I'm looking for it to come up right now. And glasses. Okay. We know that there's a 4-day work week. We have that one. And then we have our governing board meeting that's tonight, but now the 27th. We also want to probably at some point discuss when you want to have your retreat.
Thank you very much. So with that governing board, June 29th is a Saturday. Please respond to Kim if you can do that. If that is not available, a different Saturday. Thank you. June 29th.
What do you mean a different Saturday in June?
Oh, July.
July.
Yeah, anytime. June or July. Okay. Yes.
We'll send out
an email for
a survey.
Thank
basically,
you.
with a couple dates for you.
Perfect. Thank you. Draft agenda for June 27th will be updated and revised. 10.3, request for future agenda items. Tonight, I have some. We'll go ahead and start with Ms. Doan. Anything to add?
No.
Okay. Mr. Sandoval?
Yeah, for me, and this may be something that we add to our board retreat, but one of the things that I want to make sure that we're thinking of as we go through our strategic plan is our diversity and inclusion really initiatives and focus more than anything else. You know, I would love to understand how we're kind of overlaying diversity and inclusion across all verticals, right?
Yeah, I think, sorry for interrupting. I found the most up-to-date future board items, which was, I think, back in May. I thought you had asked for diversity and inclusion update.
Yeah, and it came via a Friday report.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, so now you want to have a conversation at the board
Yeah, I
retreat.
just want to understand.
Okay.
I mean, thank you for the report. I think it was a good, initial understanding of our diversity and inclusion program, if you will. But I definitely want to understand from an inclusionary regard how it is, again, overlaid across everything that we do as a district.
Okay, I'll second that. If you don't mind calling Dr. Davidson for exact feedback that you're looking for to discuss so that he can relay to our superintendent and then governing board if there's anything specific in that topic to let Ms. Linda Pellis know so that we could get a robust conversation during our board retreat.
Perfect.
Thank you. Anything else? Nope.
Nope, thanks.
Ms. Bangrelli?
No, I don't.
Ms. Hunter, okay, all right. So I have a few. With my new experience in e-courses with the Peoria School District in 2006, I would like to, we can start off with the board report just so I can see if this is something that we want to discuss. Our e-course platform, in a sense of how do we offer it to students? They take AZ merit scores. Do we see a difference between students who are in class versus kids that are taking e-course and then take the AZ merit? The cost, and are we seeing the value returned with our students that are in the e-course? I know there are different types of learners, but I would like to see the financial investment that we're taking it, and is it really helping our kids succeed?
I'll second that one.
Okay. The second thing I would like to discuss, I know in a previous board meeting, Ms. Stone, you had discussed all-day kindergarten. I would like to support a study session on that. What's the investment? Are we having the outcomes? Is it impacting? There are a lot of studies there are a lot of studies that show it's detrimental. So I would really like the governing board to have a deep dive conversation with all-day kindergarten. Is there a second? Okay. Last two things. One, we've been spending a lot of conversation on safety and mitigating risk. Ms. Myers, I believe this is in your area. Can we look at data trends for the past 1, 3, 5 year in property liability, workers' comp, to see if there are any changes? We've invested in a new position, the safety risk. Is that having, are we getting what we are investing in? How are we meeting those needs? Do we see any additional trends in those liabilities or risk? What are our claims? And I believe Valley Schools has all that data.
President Martinez, members of the governing board, that is correct. Valley Schools would be able to assist us with that data. We do carry our workers' compensation as well as general liability with Valley Schools. Would you like to see that information in a Friday report? We could certainly compile that and publish it in a Friday report if that's your request.
I would actually like a presentation for the board because we have spent so much a lot of time discussing safety and risk and the financial investment. I want to know if we're making progress.
President Sahar Martinez, members of the governing board, we could certainly do that. Please keep in mind that our chief operations officer on that side of the House is in the process of conducting safety audits, and it's been less than a full fiscal year for the district to start identifying priorities as far as remedying deficiencies as well as identifying best practices. So we can certainly provide information to date, but I would like to remind the governing board that it's been just under a full fiscal year with the new position.
Okay. Do I have a second? Would we like a board report then first instead of a presentation? Would that work? Okay. Okay, let's start with a board report and then we'll go from there. And Mr. Sandoval, is that a second? Thank you. And the last request is the governing board having, and maybe this is at our study session, a robust conversation on budgeting, planning, on how we as a board and the administration want to discuss our process in a situation of prioritizing cuts to the district if our override does not pass. Something that the board needs to discuss what programs or people we're going to prioritize when we look at trade-offs if we don't have the funding and the revenue to continue the model that we currently have.
Don't we have another year on that?
So we would discuss the process and how we want to move forward and give direction to the administration, not actually making, hey, we're going to slash this off or that, but just how do we want to look at that data to make determination if that is something that we're going to consider, because, yeah, without going into detail, because it's not an agenda item.
I guess I'm just wondering if we're there yet, because I know the district is going through the process of looking at every program, you know what I mean? So I guess I'm just wondering how that would coincide with the timeline of what the district is doing as far as evaluating programs and costs, et cetera.
President Sarah Martinez, Mrs. Underhill, you'll recall that our override funds certain voter-approved categories. And then as far as the work that we're doing with data analytics, that's district-wide. So they're related but also separate. To answer Mrs. Doan's question, that is correct. There is one more opportunity after 2019. So just to clarify factual information for the board.
Thank you. And again, I'm not looking at items, just the process. Do we want, and when I say process, are we going to put a committee of the board? Are we going to have the administration, like the current budget committee? Is like, do we want them to do all the work? Do we want the board to do all the work? What's the process when we get to that point?
And maybe, I'm assuming when we went through, override election in the past, what was there a process that we went to, kind of that plan B, that, what if conversation, or?
Being mindful of the agenda item, I'll respond that we were not in a situation where we were initiating budget cuts the following year as a current override would wind down in year 6 and 7. So I don't believe historically the district has had to do that.
Gotcha.
Because they've not been in that situation.
Yeah, I just don't want to set the tone that we're going to lose.
Right. No, and I respect that. So if there's no interest at this time, so it's yes? Yes,
perhaps.
okay. So we can put.
If we're talking about stewardship, this thing called stewardship, it's not the worst-case scenario to have a process that we use, regardless of with an override or anything, that suggests that here's how we are going to be making decisions with respect to spending on anything. And that I don't think that is a worse agenda item to be discussing. And it's not whether we're doing all-day kindergarten or going through, anything like that, but rather how might we be making our decisions. And I think it leads into how a strategic plan causes us to make decisions. So if you frame it on that.
Yes, so it may be wrong framing on how a positioning, but just a process on budgeting. So it sounds to me that we have a second, but it doesn't have to be right now, and it doesn't have to be at the study session. It could be in the future. I know that we had the strategic plan process, so maybe something like that be offered in the future of how we look at spending and budgeting. So, okay. All right, and that's it. Any other additional items? All right, 11.1, I need a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
We have a motion by Ms. Doan and a second by Mr. Sandoval. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously.